Hello and welcome to Newsclick. Indian companies have been using tax havens to bring funds to the country as well as route money outside the country. The impact of black money and tax havens have come into renewed focus with the recent Panama tax haven leak papers. To discuss this, we have with us editor, Economic and Political Weekly, Paranjoy Guha Thakurta. Paranjoy, thank you for joining us. Indian companies have been using certain overseas countries to route money into the country as well as outside the country. How does it really work, and what are the benefits these companies are getting out of it?
The use of tax havens by different corporate entities and wealthy individuals, or what are called high net worth individuals, this is a phenomenon that is not unique to India. It's happening across the globe. If you look at the world, there are somewhere in the region of about 90 jurisdictions which could be described as tax havens. Though the authorities and the people who live in these areas, they often call themselves low tax jurisdictions or no tax jurisdictions. One of them is Panama. Now, these jurisdictions are often located in small islands, sometimes called treasure islands, which has been described, that's a title of a book in fact. But say a country like the United Kingdom, it alone at different points of time have encouraged the establishment of something like 18 tax havens, the Isle of Man, the British Virgin Islands, Guernsey, it goes on and on and on. And it's interesting that within countries, say the United States of America, there are tax havens. For instance, the state of Delaware in the US, the state of Florida, the state of Arizona. These are, so among the 50 states in the United States of America, there are tax havens. Say in Europe, there are what are called microstates or principalities like Liechtenstein, like San Marino, like Monaco. These are also within the European Union small sovereign, call them nation states if you like, call them principalities, call them microstates, where there are little or no tax. So what happens is, what we are seeing across the globe is that these areas encourage companies and rich individuals to park their money because they offer them secrecy. And the dividing line between what you might say legal forms of tax avoidance and illegal forms of tax evasion, which includes money laundering, converting illegal money into legal money through a process which is sometimes called round tripping, where the money moves rapidly across different jurisdictions, or a process which is sometimes called treaty shopping, where you take advantage of double taxation avoidance treaties in different jurisdictions. The whole purpose is to create situations where you pay very little tax or you pay no tax. Now, this had been going on for years, why years? For decades on end. But after the Great Recession of 2008, the very countries that had at one point of time promoted the establishment of these kinds of tax havens, including countries that are part of the OECD, or the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, rich countries, developed countries, they started realizing how their governments were suffering. Well-known companies, whether it be Walmart, Apple, Yahoo, many of these companies, large multinational corporations and conglomerates, were basing their headquarters, and therefore they were avoiding payment of tax. So after the Great Recession, countries were more than alarmed, and the OECD had a special initiative called BEPS, Base Erosion and Profit Shifting Initiative. The whole idea is to shift profits from one jurisdiction to the other so you don't pay taxes on them. And today, this is being talked about by everybody, from President Barack Obama of the US to the head of the World Bank, and everybody and his brother are today expressing concern at how these tax havens are being misused, not merely to legally avoid payment of taxes, but for illegal purposes, for nefarious activities where you convert money that has been obtained through illegal means into legal money.
The US has been opposing these tax havens in the earlier, but now they seem to be sort of soft pedaling on the whole issue and are unwilling to follow the OECD's proposed standards. Isn't it a double standard there?
There's a huge amount of hypocrisy and double standards. As I mentioned earlier, within the US there are tax havens. States like Delaware. You look at any Indian company which is set up base in the US, they invariably have their headquarters in Delaware or Florida. So there are tax havens within the US. That's the first point. The second point is, countries like Panama, countries which are part of the West Indies, St. Kitts and Nevis, Cayman Islands, these are all tax havens which are in close proximity to the United States of America. Now, whereas the Panama leaks has focused on, non-American leaders, whether it be the relatives of Vladimir Putin or the Chinese premier or the head of state of Iceland or Spain or Pakistan. But the fact is, this is not to say that those who are operating out of the US or those who are operating out of other countries in Europe are squeaky clean. And the hypocrisy, as I was mentioning earlier, goes beyond this. The same countries which had once upon a time encouraged tacitly or covertly the working of these tax havens are today feeling the pinch. Britain is the classic example. Today, David Cameron's father may have been implicated in one of these, or it has been found that he had investments through one of these shell companies in Panama. But the fact is, Britain alone has about 18 so-called tax havens which come within the jurisdiction. And many would argue that even the financial center in London, the city of London as it's called, is also very much aware and part of this whole complex chain through which money moves rapidly across jurisdictions, so that it becomes for regulatory authorities to detect the real owners, the beneficial owners. It becomes difficult for regulatory authorities to lift the corporate veil, to unearth the very complex patterns of corporate ownership which conceal and which seek to obfuscate the way money moves illegally across the globe.
It means some of these countries are trying to be the next Switzerland.
Switzerland will soon lose its position as the biggest center for providing what they call financial services. I personally have met a person in Singapore who said soon Singapore will overtake Switzerland in terms of the sheer volume of businesses and services that it provides, what are often euphemistically called financial services, accounting services. Essentially services that help people, set up different kinds of corporate entities which are used for a variety of purposes, some legal, some not so legal. There are many gray areas in the way some of these corporate entities operate, and the whole purpose is to ensure secrecy, to ensure that regulatory bodies, say in India bodies like the SEBI, Securities and Exchange Board of India, say the Reserve Bank of India, they find it extremely difficult to follow the trail, to unearth the way in which companies are held, the intricate patterns of cross holdings of ownership. That's the way this is why these kinds of countries specialize in provide a range of services, including how to set up corporate entities.
Can it ever be prevented? It looks like it cannot be. There will be a loophole somewhere always.
Look, there will always be some loophole, but if the authorities of particular states are determined, there's no reason why it can't. It's not a coincidence that the BEPS, the Base Erosion and Profit Shifting Initiative of the OECD, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, they are trying, and they've been trying for the last few years, to put together what is called an automatic information exchange network. So all such information is automatically put into a network which can be accessed by regulatory authorities. And interestingly, among the countries that have opposed being a part, and I mean there are over 100 companies which have agreed, including India, but Panama hasn't agreed, and so hasn't Bahrain, so hasn't two small countries in the Pacific. One of them is Nauru and the other is Tuvalu. These are very, very small countries. I mean, their population is equal to a small locality in the city where we are talking, that's Delhi. But a few of these countries are very, very assiduously resisting participating in international initiatives which will lead to automatic exchange of information, which is different from where a criminal complaint is filed and a particular law enforcing authority approaches a particular government and seeks information on specific corporate entities or specific individuals. This network would lead to a fair amount of information being automatically exchanged, and there are still a few countries who are resisting this move.
What are the obvious fallouts of this tax events and parking money or routing money through there? Apart from regulatory purposes, obviously there is an obvious tax loss that's happening.
What you see, and this is what the Panama leaks have indicated. Remember, the Panama leaks is the biggest leak of information in humankind. And mind you, it's just one company, one firm of lawyers, one Mossack Fonseca based in Panama. Yes, there may be large numbers of corporate entities and the data pertains to long periods of time, but this is after all just one company. Imagine the huge amount of information that exists. That's point one. What's the kind of information? Where do terrorists get money? When people are trafficking human beings, when people are trafficking illegal substances, drugs, contraband, it could be bullion, it could be diamonds illegally obtained, it could be antiques, it could be stolen paintings, it could be animal parts, it could be parts of endangered species. All these kinds of illegal activities that are taking place, where do they get their money? Where do the funds come from? Who funds them? This is not the first time, but say in India, successive individuals who've held the post of National Security Advisor have said, yes, our stock exchanges are being used to launder money by terrorists. The whole idea, these tax havens make it difficult for law enforcing authorities to trace the real owners, the beneficial owners of these funds. So if company A is owned by company B and in turn is controlled by company C, which in turn is controlled by the famous D company, it becomes difficult for the law enforcing authorities in India to lift their corporate veil to find out who are the genuine owners, who are the real people, who are the beneficial owners of these companies. So what these tax havens do is facilitate a whole range of illegal and nefarious activities. So when you look at the different atrocities that are being taking place in conflict zones, in war zones, when you look at economies that are being ravaged, when you look at human beings who are being trafficked, you can know that behind the money that is generated, behind the big bucks that are involved in all these kinds of nefarious and illegal activities, there's a very strong possibility that there is some tax haven or the other which is a part of these kinds of illegal criminal networks of these global, the illicit flows of funds across the globe.
We have a government that promised to bring back black money into the entire black money into the country within 100 days of taking power. Nothing has happened. It's been almost 2 years. Is there a lack of political will? Do you see a lack of political will there?
The president of the Bharatiya Janata Party said, "Ye chunavi jumla." Now that's a very quaint phrase, which means this was an exaggerated claim. I think there were some individuals in India who had made all kinds of estimates and argued that huge amounts of money had been taken out of India by Indians and kept in various places, including in Swiss banks. Now, the former Deputy Prime Minister of India, Mr. L.K. Advani too, had talked about bringing the money back. In the run-up to the 2014 elections, Mr. Narendra Modi had repeatedly made claims that his government would bring back all the money. And some of his supporters like Baba Ramdev said, no, within 100 days this money will be brought back. But thereafter, Mr. Modi himself realized pretty early in his term, I think if I am not mistaken, sometime in November 2014 in one of his Man Ki Baat radio programs, where he said he really doesn't know how much money. So from making a claim before the elections that every poor family in India would get 15 lakh rupees, about some months later it was found that not only did the government not know what kind of money, the chances of that money coming back to India are remote, simply because that money is not going to remain in that bank. That money is going to be spent, and that money is going to be recycled, and is going to come back. Some of that money might come back to India laundered white. It may have been black money when it left India, but by the time it's come back to India, it's absolutely white. And an act has been enacted by Parliament penalizing Indians who are holding assets abroad illegally. But these schemes have yielded a very small amount of revenue for the government when you compare it to the total size of the parallel economy. When you look at the total size of the black economy, more recently in February of 2016, Finance Minister Mr. Arun Jaitley has also given a kind of a compliance window for people to declare their undeclared income. He doesn't like it being described as an amnesty scheme or a voluntary disclosure of income scheme, but many of us believe it's nothing very dissimilar about it. But time alone will tell what kind of money or how much of that black money will come to the government. But surely, I think Mr. Modi, Mr. Amit Shah, Mr. Arun Jaitley, all of them realize that's one thing to make a claim in the run-up to the elections, and to actually implement that promise. There's a huge difference between the claim that was made and what is the reality.
Thank you, Paranjoy. Thank you so much for joining us to discuss such a pertinent issue.